Halo Infinite's multiplayer rolled out on November 15th, and to say 343 Industries' latest attempt at nailing the Halo formula has been a controversial one is something of an understatement. Indeed, it has been a turbulent few weeks for the game since it rolled out, and the discontent voiced by so many who hold the series so dear to their hearts has been plain for all to see. There definitely is some good news, which I'll get to in just a second, but while it may sound just a tad melodramatic, I wholeheartedly believe that Infinite's multiplayer launch has on the whole been a complete and utter disaster. But enough of the doom and gloom, for the time being at least, and let's start with the good news. In terms of gameplay, the most important thing of all, 343 Industries has absolutely nailed it. At its core, Halo Infinite's multiplayer is fantastic to actually play, and I think it's as sure a sign as any we could get that the single player will be a very entertaining experience where it perhaps matters most. It feels like a Halo game through and through, and I've not been this glued to one of the series' multiplayer offerings since Halo 3. On that occasion, I was a university student who was able to pick up the game at midnight and spend pretty much every waking hour playing it for the following few weeks, and while the increased responsibilities which accompany adult life mean I can't be quite as fanatical these days as I could when I was 19 years old, I've nonetheless been spending way more time playing the game than I probably should have, and a lot more time than I expected I would. From a mechanical perspective, Halo Infinite absolutely sings. The majority of the weapons feel great to use, it runs brilliantly on my Series X, movement feels sharp and responsive, and the map design in ranked play, which I've spent most of my time with the game playing, is very solid. It feels authentically Halo through and through, and the fact that it feels like a natural extension of Bungie's previously stellar work on the series is, I think, the best compliment I can give it. That being said, there are plenty of issues which need resolving. The server desyncs, the dodgy melee mechanic, the frankly tiny lanes in larger maps which make vehicles a nightmare to use, the weird vehicle spawns themselves, and many more besides. But these are all things that can, and hopefully will, be improved fairly easily over time. One would hope at least. When all is said and done, as long as Infinite's foundations are strong, and they are very strong, I have full confidence that the rest of the house can be sorted over time. Is it ideal to have all these problems which need fixing so early in the game's life cycle? Of course not, but I'd rather have an Infinite which is a joy to play and a little rough around the edges than a polished experience which isn't actually much fun to get to grips with. Unfortunately, however, none of this really matters in light of what has happened in another area. You guessed it, I'm talking about the game's microtransactions and storefront. There has been huge uproar in the Halo community, and rightly so. It is predatory, it is completely unbalanced, and it is regressive in so many ways. Over the last few weeks, I've seen many say that the storefront isn't necessarily a bad thing, that it's an understandable inclusion given the multiplayer's free-to-play status. Others have been far less forgiving, pointing to how gross it is that so many items cannot seemingly be attained in any other way than spending real money. Items, I might add, that didn't cost a thing to unlock in previous titles. And given there are so many more opinions that it would be impossible to list every one of them here, I wanted to shout into the YouTube void myself and give you all my 2 cents. So here it is. The fact Halo Infinite has a storefront at all is truly appalling, and the fact that the series we love so much has stooped to this level is an absolute disaster. It's never been wanted, it's certainly never been needed, and that it's included at all is testament to the steep downward trajectory the Halo franchise has been on ever since Bungie let another studio take over the reins. Halo isn't just some run-of-the-mill series ripe for microtransaction experimentation, it is one of the greatest video game series ever created, and watching everything unfold has made for extraordinarily unpleasant viewing. What I always loved most about Halo was its purity, for want of a better word. Entries in the series may have got flashier over time, with better graphics and bigger explosions, but under Bungie, the series' beating heart always remained the same. Halo was about sitting down on the couch with your buddy to play co-op, fragging out in one of the most diverse multiplayer offerings on the market, using the robust customization options to create your perfect Spartan, and for some, including myself, it was also about obsessively playing ranked mode until you suddenly realised it was the morning of the next day. Halo Halo never followed trends, it was a trend setter from minute one of the day Combat Evolved released back in 2001, a series always somewhere close to the forefront of first-person shooter design. You could argue that hasn't been the case ever since 343 Industries took over, and I'd be inclined to agree as I myself wasn't the biggest fan of 4 or 5, but there's certainly an argument to be made that they at least did do their best, even if their efforts unfortunately didn't live up to Bungie's incredibly high standards. The microtransactions and storefront, on the other hand, are in my view a very strong indicator as to how far the series has fallen. Rather than setting trends, Halo is in certain areas now following them, and the trend that Microsoft and 343 Industries have chosen to follow demonstrates just how little care is being paid to the series as a whole. Honestly, I just don't understand what on earth is going on. I don't understand how anyone involved in the creation of this game could have ever possibly thought that this was in any way a good idea. Halo should be a shining beacon of game design, an example of a series everyone can point to and say, that franchise is a class act. But instead, here we are, on the receiving end of a title in one of the greatest video game series of all time, which is trying to nickel and dime us at every turn. It is extremely worrying indeed. Oh, and another thing, I've seen a lot of people say that the complaints around these issues show a divide between younger and older gamers. Don't ever believe that, even for 1 second. Even if the new generation of gamers prefers to have unlockables and skins and a progression system, and they don't think having a storefront where you can buy digital items is necessarily a bad thing, they only expect that because video game companies realise they could get away with introducing them, and so have done so mercilessly, ever more quickly stepping up their efforts to coax people into spending more money through whatever unscrupulous methods they can conjure up. It's not a divide between gamers young and old, it's a divide between the people playing games and the people responsible for actually producing them. If video game companies had the means to do what they're doing now some 20 odd years ago, trust me, they would have done it then too. It's all just a matter of timing. And you know what? Whether we're talking about 20 years ago or the present, I genuinely thought Halo was always going to be above it. You might be wondering at this stage of the video if I actually have a point to make beyond the rant you've just listened to, and the answer is no, not especially. All I really wanted to get off my chest was my disappointment that at a time where excitement for the Halo franchise should be at an all-time high, it's become ever more obvious that the series' legacy is no longer considered worth protecting by those responsible for choosing its direction. Call me old-fashioned, but I think what's happened in recent weeks really is a crying shame, and ultimately a disaster for the series. Thanks for taking the time to watch the video, boys, girls and Spartans. If you enjoyed it, do consider liking, subscribing, letting me know your thoughts, and perhaps even supporting the channel via Patreon, and hopefully I'll see you all again soon.